Grocery stores are everywhere, but they weren't always this massive. In the 60s, a handful of brands led the pack, like A&P and Safeway. Then came decades of expansion, acquisitions, and global competition, creating retail giants like Walmart, Target, and Aldi. But the question is, which one of these is actually the biggest? Let's find out. Starting off in the 60s, when the biggest grocery store chains were both American, A&P and Safeway. A&P, short for the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, had been around since the late 1800s and was still massive at this point, operating nearly 4,000 stores across the United States. The second biggest player at the time was Safeway, with over 2,000 stores in the US. Sure, compared to A&P it doesn't sound that impressive, but if you look just a tiny bit further down the list you can see how these two companies were completely dominating the market. Not a single one of their competitors even got close to them. That being said, A&P was not doing that well anymore in the 60s. The company's business model was built on smaller, outdated neighborhood stores that hadn't changed much since the 40s. Meanwhile, Safeway was investing in large modern supermarkets in the suburbs, complete with parking lots, bright lighting, and more product variety. By the mid-60s, consumer preferences had clearly moved toward the newer style of shopping. So as A&P store locations shrunk, Safeways were increasing. Interestingly, both companies actually pioneered some retail concepts we take for granted today. A&P was actually one of the first major retailers to introduce private labels or store-branded products. One of the biggest examples of this was their 8 O'Clock coffee brand, which became one of the best-selling coffees in the US. Meanwhile, Safeway was introducing sell-by and use-by dates on their products all the way back in the 1930s. By the mid-60s, Safeway also became an international name, as they were opening stores in Canada, the UK, and Australia. Meanwhile, A&P was struggling to keep afloat with just their stores in North America. Coming into the 70s, it seemed like Safeway was slowly nudging up to the top, but a different grocery store brand was also trying to catch up. And by 1978, Aldi would become the biggest supermarket chain in the world.
Goodness guaranteed or your money back.
Aldi's story starts in 1913 when Anna Albrecht opened a small store in Essen, Germany. After World War II, her sons Karl and Theo took over and built it into something completely different from other grocers. Instead of big stores and wide selections, they focused on simplicity, just a few products at low prices and nothing else. Customers bagged their own groceries, paid deposits for cards, and shopped in smaller, quieter stores. In 1962, they renamed the business Aldi, short for Albrecht Discount. Around that same time, the brothers had split the company after a disagreement about selling cigarettes. So they divided the business into Aldi North and Aldi South, but both stuck to the same core idea, efficiency and affordability. By the mid-70s, Aldi had expanded across Germany with hundreds of nearly identical stores. Each carried just 500 to 700 products, most of them Aldi's own private labels, keeping costs low and margins high. Their standardized, no-frills model let them open stores quickly and dominate the discount market. Once Germany was conquered, it was time to expand, as they expanded into Austria, the Netherlands, and the US, proving the model could work anywhere. Every decision, from store layout to packaging, was designed to save money and pass those savings on to shoppers. By sacrificing some of the comfort that comes with other grocery stores, they managed to keep their prices extremely low, which in the end for the average shopper is the most important thing about grocery stores. Aldi would remain on top for quite a while, but by the early 90s a new company was starting to overtake everyone else on this list. This is a chain that actually has 0 locations in the US. Let's take a look at Carrefour.
Carrefour, meilleur chaque jour.
Carrefour took a completely different approach from Aldi with their expansion. Founded in France back in 1959, Carrefour was one of the first major retailers to adopt the hypermarket or superstore concept, a sort of mix between a grocery store and a department store. The concept already existed in Belgium and the US for a few years before that, but these companies would usually have a maximum of 3 or 4 locations. Carrefour, on the other hand, took it international. Their first hypermarket opened in 1963 in a Paris suburb, and it was unlike anything shoppers had seen before. Huge aisles, parking for hundreds of cars, and everything from groceries to clothes under one roof. By offering convenience and variety on a massive scale, Carrefour turned shopping into something more than just a quick errand. Through the 70s and 80s, Carrefour slowly expanded across Europe, but it was in the early 90s that things really exploded. By 1992, they had entered over a dozen countries, including Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Brazil. They were continuing to open new stores at a record pace. Their model especially thrived in emerging economies, where suburban shopping and car ownerships were growing fast. This is why they have a strong presence in some parts of Latin America, huge parts of Africa, and even Taiwan in Asia. They weren't just building stores, they were building entire retail ecosystems around highways and new suburbs. By 1991, they reached over 1,000 store locations, and from there the number would balloon astronomically. So much so that in 1996 they would even overtake Aldi as the largest grocery store chain in the world, owning more than 5,000 shops worldwide. The company would remain on top for quite a while, so let's take a quick look at one of their biggest competitors in Europe, Lidl.
Lidl, more for you.
Lidl's story also begins in Germany, and like Aldi, its roots go back several decades. In the early 1930s, a businessman named Joseph Schwarz became a partner in a small local fruit wholesaler. For many years, the company focused on wholesale trade, but by the early 1970s, Joseph's son, Dieter Schwarz, saw an opportunity in the growing discount retail market. In 1973, he opened the first Lidl discount store in Ludwigshafen, Germany. The concept was simple: small stores, limited products, minimal staff, and very low prices. Basically the same thing Aldi was doing at the time. I mean, to this day, they are somewhat known as an Aldi copycat. But I mean, it's a grocery discounter. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Throughout the 80s, Lidl expanded rapidly across West Germany, opening hundreds of standardized stores and becoming a major competitor to Aldi. In 1989, Lidl took its first step abroad with new stores in France. Over the next few years, it expanded across Europe, entering Italy, Spain, and the United Kingdom by 1994. And in each market they followed the same exact playbook: a lean store design, centralized logistics, and low-priced private label goods. By the year 2000, they started opening shops all over Eastern and Central Europe as well, making their numbers grow by over 1,000 store locations within a single year. And by 2009, they overtook both Walmart and Aldi to become the second largest grocery store in the world. But Walmart wasn't having it, kicking off one of the fiercest races on this chart. And in the next 5 years, everything would change.
My name is Darrell, and I save people money so they can live better.
Walmart's story starts back in 1962 when Sam Walton opened his first discount store in Rogers, Arkansas. His strategy started by positioning himself in smaller towns that weren't served by any other discounters at the time. This worked fantastically for him, and through the 70s and 80s, Walmart grew rapidly across the United States, opening hundreds of new stores and building one of the most efficient supply chains in the world. In the 80s, they opened their first supercenters, and then in the 90s and early 2000s, the company expanded internationally. They opened new stores in China, Mexico, South America, and more. By 2010, Walmart was a true juggernaut of the industry, as they had more than 8,500 locations in over 15 countries, and they employed more than 2 million people worldwide. And even though in the early 2010s they faced competition from online shopping like Amazon, it didn't stop their growth at all. They even continued expanding into more of Latin America and Asia, including India. By 2012, they even became the highest earning grocery store chain in China. It didn't take them too long to overtake every other competitor on this list, and by 2015 Walmart would finally take the title of the grocery store chain with the most locations in the world. This wouldn't last forever though, as Carrefour would reclaim that title in 2018, and then remain in that position for a very long time. So instead, let's take a look at one of the chains with the biggest comeback stories on this list, Tesco.
Oh, don't forget your melon.
Tesco's story begins more than a century ago, starting in 1919 when Jack Cohen began selling surplus groceries from a market stall in East London. A few years later, he started using the name Tesco, and in 1931 he opened the very first Tesco store in Burnt Oak, Middlesex. By the 1960s, the company had grown into one of the largest grocery chains in the United Kingdom, expanding rapidly by acquiring smaller shops and opening hundreds of new locations across the country. Tesco also began experimenting with self-service supermarkets in the 1950s. Before that, in the UK, if you needed groceries, you would tell the person at the counter what you needed and they would go fetch it for you. Tesco's momentum did not last forever. During the 70s and early 80s, Tesco's image suffered. Many shoppers saw it as cheap and outdated compared to rivals like Sainsbury, which appealed more to the growing middle class. By the mid-80s, Tesco was still a major retailer in the UK, but had fallen behind its competitors in both image and innovation. It had fallen so far behind it didn't even appear on our list anymore. But this is exactly where the comeback story begins. In the 90s, the company changed leadership. By 1995, they introduced the Club Card, one of the first major loyalty programs in retail to use customer shopping habits to create personalized offers. This gave the company a huge advantage in the UK market, and around the same time they also introduced new store formats like Express, Metro and Extra, covering everything from small convenience stores to large hypermarkets. The biggest reason for their comeback starts in the 2000s though, as they started expanding overseas into Central Europe and Asia, entering markets like Hungary, Poland, Thailand, South Korea and China. And so, after disappearing completely from this list, in 2005 they were back on it again. However, not every venture worked. Its attempts to enter the US and China market completely failed. Competition from Aldi and Lidl started becoming a real problem for them in the UK as well. And then in 2014, Tesco was involved in an accounting scandal. They overstated their own profits, but once it was found out, investors started pulling out. This meant they couldn't sustain their ventures abroad that well anymore, and their number of stores started shrinking again. They went from operating over 6,900 stores between 2014 and 15 to operating barely over 4,500 in 2025. But it seems like their numbers are starting to grow again since last year. The top 5 chains on this list have remained unchanged since 2005. Today they have a huge lead over all of their competitors. That being said, ever since the pandemic, grocery shopping online has become increasingly more popular. It's gotten to the point where some groceries even open online order-only locations that work like warehouses, where people put in their order online and then come pick it up at the appointed time. At the same time, Amazon tried to join the grocery market themselves with their walk-in and walk-out stores. While their venture failed massively, this doesn't mean that the idea can't be pursued further. It looks like we're about to witness a new change in how people go grocery shopping. The company that can adapt to this the fastest is also going to be the one to remain on top. Let me know in the comments which company you think will be the one. Alright, thank you, have a good one, and see you next time.